The air smells of pine, cordite, and freezing mud. It is the winter of 1944. In the Ardennes forest, the world has been reduced to the color of a German field gray uniform and the endless skeletal white of snow on trees. For a 19-year-old soldier we will call Klaus, survival is measured in seconds. For months, the voices of his leaders have painted a clear picture of the enemy, the Americans. They are gangsters, barbarians, they take no prisoners, and those they do are subjected to horrors beyond imagination. Surrender, Minister Goebbels promised, is a death sentence. If stories like these, pulled from the forgotten corners of history, fascinate you, subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Then, the world tears itself apart, a shell screams down, the universe becomes a flash of white heat and a roar that swallows all sound. When the ringing in Klaus's ears fades, he is surrounded. The Americans are giants. They are impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, their faces smeared with dirt. They move with a calm that is more terrifying than any scream. One of them is chewing gum, a casual, alien act. A rifle is leveled at Klaus's chest. He squeezes his eyes shut, bracing for the bayonet, the bullet, the end of everything. This is it. The fate he was warned about. But the blow never comes. He opens his eyes. A hand is offering him a cigarette. Another soldier wordlessly hands him a canteen. The water is cold and clean. It is a small kindness, so unexpected it feels like a trick. He and the others are marched onto trucks. The fear remains, a cold stone in the gut. This must be a prelude to the real interrogation, the real pain. The real shock began when they crossed the Atlantic. Over 370,000 German prisoners were shipped to the United States. For a boy who had only known German villages, the sight of the New York skyline from the deck of a troop ship was not just unbelievable, it was a psychological blow. This was the decaying, degenerate nation they were told about. It looked powerful. It looked whole. They were taken to one of over 500 camps scattered across the country. And here, the American torture began. The first instrument of torment was a bar of soap. They were stripped of their lice-infested uniforms and herded into a building filled with steam and the hiss of pipes. For men who had lived in frozen mud for months, the feeling of scalding hot water washing away the grime of the battlefield was a shock more profound than any beating. They were given clean clothes. Surplus U.S. Army uniforms, dyed a deep blue, with the letters POWs stenciled on the back. They were deloused. They were seen by a doctor. And then, they were fed. In the mess hall, Klaus stood with a metal tray, his stomach a hollow ache. At home, his family ate Kriegsbrot, war bread, a dense brick of rye, sawdust, and potato flour. His rations on the front were even worse. An American cook slapped a serving of meatloaf and mashed potatoes onto his tray. Next to it sat 2 slices of the most perfectly white bread he had ever seen. He picked a slice up. It was light, fluffy. He took a bite. It was like eating a cloud. This was not prison food. It was a feast. He ate, and the others ate with him, in a state of stunned silence. The food was not poisoned. The guards watched them with a kind of bored indifference. When the meal was over, they were shown to their barracks. There were clean cots, with blankets. There was no torture. There was no cruelty. There was only this strange, unsettling abundance. Klaus lay on his cot, his stomach full for the first time in a year, and a deep suspicion took root in his mind. This was wrong. All of it. The hot water, the soft bread, the clean bed. It had to be a trick. A new form of psychological warfare he could not comprehend. This kindness, he was certain, was just the beginning of the real horror. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that defied all logic. The morning roll call was crisp and professional, not brutal. The work was hard but not punitive. As per the Geneva Convention, enlisted men were put to work, often filling the severe labor shortages on American farms. Klaus found himself picking cotton in Mississippi or harvesting sugar beets in Colorado, working alongside men who were supposed to be his enemies. They were paid 80 cents a day in camp scrip. They were harvesting the very food that fueled the Allied war machine. In the fields, they saw America up close. They saw towns that had not been bombed into skeletons. They saw children who were not gaunt from hunger. They saw a country operating with an effortless, overwhelming normality. The propaganda posters of a decadent, collapsing nation felt like a distant, feverish dream. The reality was this endless, infuriating bounty. The guards were not monsters. They were often older men, farmers themselves, who would sometimes share a thermos of coffee or talk about the weather. The indoctrination continued in the mess hall. One day, a guard pointed to a thick, brown paste next to the bread. Peanut butter. Klaus tried it. The taste was bewildering, sweet yet salty, rich and fatty. A food so non-essential, so purely for pleasure, it felt like a moral failing. How could a nation at war produce such things in such quantities? The average German prisoner in America, according to later Red Cross reports, consumed nearly 4,000 calories a day. That was almost double the official ration for a civilian back in bombed-out Hamburg. If this story of inverted reality surprises you, subscribe to our channel. There are forgotten histories hidden in plain sight. The true weapon of this psychological war, however, was not found on the dinner tray. It was found in the camp canteen. Here, for a few cents of scrip, a soldier of the Third Reich could buy the liquid soul of America, an ice-cold Coca Cola. Imagine it. You were raised on ersatz coffee and watery beer. Your entire life has been defined by sacrifice for the fatherland. And now, in a prison camp, you hold a curved glass bottle filled with a sweet, bubbling, caramel-colored nectar. It was more than a drink. It was a symbol, a liquid testament to a power so vast it could afford to give its prisoners sugar and ice in the middle of a world war. Some prisoners discovered baseball, a baffling game of sticks and balls explained by a guard from Brooklyn. Others heard jazz music on the radio, the so-called degenerate noise they were told to despise, and found their feet tapping along to its rhythm. The camps had libraries filled with books that had been burned in Germany 10 years earlier. They had orchestras and theater groups. They were being re-educated, not with lectures and threats, but with simple, undeniable pleasures. But the kindness was a double-edged sword. Every comfort was a fresh wound to their pride, a new crack in the foundation of their world. The deepest cuts came in the mail. A letter would arrive from home, large sections blacked out by censors. But the words that remained told the real story. His mother wrote of the constant air raids, the dwindling food, the cold that seeped into their bones. She asked if he was being treated well. Klaus looked down at his own hands. They were strong and callous from farm work, not withered from hunger. He wore a clean uniform. His belly was full of meatloaf and that magical, cloud-like white bread. And in that moment, the terrible, disorienting truth crashed down upon him. He, the prisoner of war, was safer, healthier, and better fed than his own family, the supposedly free citizens of the glorious Reich. His captivity was more dignified than their freedom. The honor he was taught to die for felt like a cruel joke. The survival he had stumbled into felt like a betrayal. He was a captive, living a better life than his captors. The re-education was not always subtle. It was not always a Coca Cola or a slice of white bread. As the war ground towards its inevitable conclusion, the American strategy shifted. It became more direct, more brutal in its honesty. The prisoners were marched into the same halls where they had once watched Hollywood fantasies. The projector flickered to life. But this was not a movie. There were no stars, no music. There was only silence, broken by the mechanical whir of the film reel. On the screen, images appeared. Skeletal figures in striped pajamas stared out with hollow eyes. Piles of emaciated bodies were bulldozed into mass graves. This was Buchenwald. This was Dachau. This was Bergen-Belsen. This was the truth of the Reich they had served. At first, there were shouts. Propaganda. Lies. Faked footage. But the images kept coming. Relentless. Undeniable. The shouts died down, replaced by a thick, horrified silence. Some men vomited. Others wept openly, their faces buried in their hands. Klaus just stared, his mind refusing to connect the soldiers in the film, the guards of these camps, with the uniform he had once worn with such pride. This was paired with a different kind of film, a different kind of truth. They were shown newsreels of American factories, endless assembly lines churning out bombers, tanks, and ships. A voiceover calmly stated the facts. In 1944 alone, the United States produced over 96,000 aircraft. Germany produced less than half that. The narrator listed the tonnage of steel, the barrels of oil, the mountains of supplies flowing across the Atlantic in unending convoys. It was a war of arithmetic, and they had lost before they had even begun. Every drop of blood shed for the fatherland had been for a mathematical impossibility, for a monstrous lie. The psychological dam broke. The letters from home now read like dispatches from a dying world. His mother's words were thin, brittle. The city was gone. There was no food. The Russians were coming. Hope was a currency they could no longer afford. The contrast was a physical torment. He would read about his family starving while sitting in a mess hall with a full plate of food. He would read about the cold while lying under a warm wool blanket. Despair became a contagion in the camps. Some men simply gave up. They would stare at the wire fences for hours, their faces empty. There were whispers of suicide attempts, men who could not reconcile the soldier they were supposed to be with the monster they were told they had served. The choice was no longer about honor or duty. Those words had been burned to ash by the films. The choice was now simpler and far more terrible. To collapse under the weight of the truth, or to endure it. To survive was to accept the shame. To die was to escape it. Klaus worked in the fields, his body moving on autopilot. He picked the cotton that would become uniforms. He harvested the beets that would become sugar. He was a cog in the machine that had crushed his world. He looked at the American guards no longer with fear or hatred, but with a baffling, soul-crushing envy. They had a home to return to. They had a country that was whole. They had a victory to celebrate. He and the others had only rubble. They had only shame. Their nation was a crime scene, and they were the accessories. The kindness they had been shown in the camp no longer felt like a trick. It felt like a judgment, a quiet, constant reminder of everything their own leaders had denied their people. They were not being punished with cruelty. They were being punished with compassion. Then, one morning in May of 1945, the news crackled over the camp loudspeakers. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. A strange, muted quiet fell over the prisoners. There were no cheers. There was no relief. It was the sound of a final, heavy door slamming shut. Their fight was over. Their cause was lost. Their world was gone. But they were still here, thousands of miles from the ruins, prisoners of a war that had ended, waiting for a future that was impossible to imagine. The journey home was the war in reverse. They left a country of impossible green, of whole cities that slept under dark, peaceful skies. They crossed the ocean and arrived in a world of gray. Gray rubble, gray dust, and the gray, gaunt faces of their own people. The Germany they had fought for no longer existed. It was a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered stone. The reunions were quiet, strained affairs. How could Klaus explain his experience? He could not speak of the hot showers and the full meals to a mother who had survived on boiled turnips. He could not describe the magic of white bread to a brother who looked like a walking skeleton. His health was an accusation. His survival felt like a collaboration. A wall of silence grew between the men who returned from America and the families who had endured the hell at home. They carried a secret shame. Their captivity had been a sanctuary. Many returned to their towns and were met with suspicion. They were the ones who had been re-educated, the ones who had tasted the enemy's food and watched his movies. They were different. They spoke of things that made no sense. They had seen a future that was not supposed to exist. For some, the contrast was too much to bear. The Germany of their memory was gone, and the Germany of reality was unbearable. A surprising number would later apply for visas, choosing to return to the land of their captivity, not as prisoners, but as immigrants. Years later, when the old men would gather, they would speak of the war in hushed tones. They spoke of the cold, the fear, the friends they lost. But the stories of their time in America were told with a different voice, a voice of wonder and of a confusion that never truly faded. They had been prepared for anything. For barbed wire, for starvation, for beatings, for death. The one thing the propaganda had never prepared them for was mercy. That was the final, paradoxical truth. The greatest weapon the Americans deployed was not a tank or a bomber. It was a simple, undeniable, and world-shattering act of decency. They were conquered not by force, but by a slice of meatloaf. Their ideology was not defeated by a bullet, but dismantled by a cold bottle of Coca Cola. They had gone to war to fight monsters, and in the end, the most shocking thing they discovered was their enemy's humanity. If this story of inverted reality shocked you, like this video, subscribe for more forgotten histories, and tell us in the comments what part surprised you the most.